Getting married is happily ever after, right? Your wedding day is the happy ending, right? Or is it? Keep watching to find out what I've been learning through the joys and struggles of married life. Hey everyone, it's Alisa from Captivated by Him, and today I will be sharing with you how God has been growing and teaching me as a newlywed wife. Some people seem to think that getting married is the happy ending and that everything in married life is just pure bliss and a wonderfully romantic adventure every single day for the rest of your life. Well, while marriage is certainly, of course, wonderful and very fun, your wedding day is not the happy ending. It's instead a joyful entrance into a new season of life God has given you, where the opportunities to serve God, to learn, to grow, to struggle, to suffer, and to rejoice all continue. Except now, you get the joy of doing it all with your spouse. So, my husband Brian and I have been married since September 6th, 2021. And in that time, God has definitely been kind to me to teach me so many things, and honestly, some of those things have not come very easily. Married life actually has been pretty challenging, but in all the good ways. And that's what I want to share with you today. Among the many things I've been learning, I picked out 3 things in particular that I wanted to share with all of you. And of course, there's definitely many more things than just 3 things that I've been learning, but then this video will become like an hour long. But through all of these sanctifying lessons, I am so thankful to have an abundantly gracious God to sustain me and also for a steadfast husband who leads me really well. So let's get into it. First, God has grown me in my understanding of having true joy. I realized that I'm really emotional, like really emotional. I easily get affected by circumstances and unmet expectations. And getting married, I had all these expectations of what a good, helpful wife is supposed to look like. You know, she's supposed to cook meals daily and always be ready for her husband to come home, or to have a really neat, organized schedule for house cleaning, and etc., etc. And when I realized I didn't have all these wife skills down, I would sometimes feel like a failure. So if I didn't have the energy to make a home-cooked meal after work, and we would have to go pick up something to eat instead, I'd sometimes feel like I'm letting Brian down, even though he never actually did anything to suggest he even thought that at all. Then I'd let myself go down this emotional spiral of how I'm not being a good helper and just get really sad. Or maybe another example is I would think about all these really high godly standards of being a biblical wife that's laid out in Scripture. The Proverbs 31 woman, for example, is rightfully commended for how she is diligent, how she's excellent, how she's wise, and how she works tirelessly for her family. She's characterized by strength and dignity, and she truly fears the Lord. And I would think about this high calling as a wife and feel like I'm not ever going to measure up to this high standard. I'm going to read from verse 27 to 28, and it says there, "She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and bless her, her husband also, and he praises her." And I would read that and be like, wow, I am not like that. And then I think about all the ways in which I've fallen short of this standard and sinned, either with it being lazy with my tasks or thinking selfishly about my time. And again, I would go down this emotional spiral of how I'm not a godly wife and just get really sad. But in all of this, God has used it to sharpen my understanding of what true joy really is. Philippians 1:18 says, "What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice." In this passage's context, Paul, who is under house arrest, is talking about how even if other believers around him mean him harm, he can still rejoice as long as Christ is glorified in the work that they are doing, even if it's in ill motivations. So regardless of his difficult circumstances, Paul confidently and emphatically says that he will still rejoice because his gaze was set on Christ being proclaimed. So my joy isn't meant to be dependent on how much I measure up to be this most skillful or perfect wife. My concern should instead be solely if God is being glorified. So rather than making it about myself and fluctuating in my fickle joy all the time based on my performance as a wife, if I was looking at whether God is being glorified, I would think about how I can improve and grow in glorifying God instead of wallowing in my own failures. My joy is set in who God is and what He has promised. On a particular occasion where I was really emotional about not measuring up to this Proverbs 31 status, Brian was reminding me to have joy, and he said something that was really encouraging to me. He said, even if you aren't the most godly wife, does God's love for you change? Of course not. God does not love you any more or less based on how mature you are. His love for you is final. Isn't that a reason to be joyful? And when he said that, it really blew my mind. Even if I don't meet my expectations, even the good godly expectations, that should never be a reason for me to lose my joy. Because my joy isn't based on my work, nor even how much Brian appreciates me, but ultimately it's based on the unchanging God whose grace never fails. And actually, that can give me the confidence to keep growing and being sanctified in godliness to become that Proverbs 31 woman. So praise God for giving me a husband who points me back to the love of God as my source of unchanging joy. So, second, God has given me more clarity to see myself rightly. I've got news for you. Who you are before getting married is the same as who you are after you get married. All those issues you struggled with during singleness? Yep, those followed me into married life. Not just that, they're that much more obvious now because you're joined together with someone as one flesh. For instance, when I was single, I knew that anxiousness was something that I tended to struggle with. And I would sometimes feel on edge if I was running late to an event or if I was getting close to some deadlines for ministry or work. I would get really stressed. And at the time, I knew it was a struggle of mine, but I thought I had it relatively under control. But being married exposes you. When I was single and I was running late to something, I would just rush out the door, grab my purse, and go to my car and drive really frantically. But now, if we're running late to something, I start to speak irritably at Brian. Something like, we're gonna be late, can we go now? Or passive aggressively say something like, I thought we were going to leave already. Interacting with my husband in these anxious moments, where before I used to just keep those thoughts to myself, exposed how much of an issue it was. Because not only was I getting stressed, it also led me to speak unkindly toward him, and it divides the unity between us. It gave me more clarity to see how anxiousness comes up very easily for me, and can sometimes lead to more sin. And this is a good thing to learn though, since having more clarity about my weaknesses gives me focus on where I need to grow and where I need to be committed to pray for. After all, Galatians 6:3 says this, "For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself." That's not to mention though, that only the weaknesses are really obvious in your marriage. The strengths you had during single life also follow you into married life. And you get more clarity about that too, and that's really fun. One of my strengths that others had commented on before is how I can be really warm and approachable. While I saw that during my single years sometimes, being married has shown me how I can really use my strengths for the Lord alongside Brian. So it's been really fun being able to learn how to use your strengths in a new way being partnered with your spouse. For example, Brian has a little bit more of a serious personality than I do. So when we have people over at our house, we tend to team up really well with our strengths. I can add by being warm and hospitable to our guests and make them feel welcome inside the home, while Brian is really good at being focused on how to build up the people we have over and how to keep those conversations really directed and focused on those things he wanted to talk about. And it's neat being able to understand the strengths that God has given me more clearly and how they can be used in a way that intentionally encourages others with my husband. So that's number 2, seeing myself more clearly. And now, third, God has been teaching me the impact of being a wife. This goes for both the positive and the negative ways. Proverbs 31:10-11 says, "An excellent wife who can find, for her worth is far above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. On the other hand, Proverbs 25:24 says this: It is better to live in a corner of the roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. When I am concerned for things of the Lord, being considerate, paying attention to Brian's likes and dislikes, and seeking to work hard for our family, it truly adds to Brian's life. There is this one weekend where Brian was preparing to teach lessons for back-to-back church events, and he was really busy preparing for them. And I wanted to care for him and support him. So I brought him some snacks upstairs in his office. He was working on his lessons really late into the night, so I would have to go to bed first, which was kind of sad. But before sleeping, I asked if I can pray for him and his preparation, so we got to do that together before I went to bed. He later said that he felt really supported during that time and that he was able to really focus on working on those lessons. But on the contrary, when I am focused on what I want, paying attention to my own expectations, and being consumed by wanting to achieve my own goals, I take away from Brian's ability to be effective. There was a night where I was really emotional and stressed about something really dumb that I've forgotten what it was by this point. But Brian had to spend the night trying to correct my thinking, align my thinking with the word, and patiently guiding me to think about the situation rightly. And as a result, I took away from the things he had been planning to work on that night. And not even just that, he later admitted that it emotionally wore him out a little, having to keep chasing me down these rabbit holes to think about things objectively rather than just sitting in my own emotions. So through these separate instances, God has shown me that in the role of a wife, I directly have an impact on Brian's life, whether that's for good or for worse. And this was something that we had gone over in premarital counseling actually, during engagement as well. But in married life, I recognize how tangible that correlation really is. It makes sense, since God made marriage to be something that brings a man and a woman to become one flesh, as it says in Genesis 2:24. Therefore, if a part of that one is focused on the Lord or focused on themselves, it's going to affect the entire whole. So currently, I am working on being a wife that can have a godly impact on her husband, because I really want Brian to be the most effective man for the Lord. And I want to do that by being keen and attentive to his wants and needs, thinking about things from God's perspective ultimately, and continually praying for this very specific thing. So I would actually also really appreciate it if you could be praying for me in these things too, because I'm going to need it. But anyhow, that's just a little bit of what God's been teaching me in married life so far. How to have true joy, 2, seeing myself more clearly, and 3, how I have an impact on Brian as his wife. I'm definitely still working on all these areas, but by God's grace, I know that He will keep sanctifying me as I pursue honoring Him in my marriage. All of that is to say, married life isn't just an easy stroll in the park. Your wedding day isn't the happily ever after that the movies depict it to be sometimes. But it's better than just an ending. Married life continues to humble you and teach you and sanctify you. And it would be really fun to hear what you're learning in marriage as well, or how you want to prepare for being married in the future. So leave a comment down below. And if you enjoyed hearing about how God has been growing me, be sure to like this video and hit the subscribe button to be notified of future videos where we share about God's work in our own lives. My husband actually also has a YouTube channel where he's going through a study on the book of Philippians. So you can check out his channel, Resounding Joy. Because, well, without resounding joy, you aren't really captivated by him, right? So you need both. Well, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, stay captivated.
Stay captivated?